So, with that said, I would like to introduce my panelists today, my dear members of the panel. First of all, Saskia, who is one of the Austrian's leading communication professionals. You're coming here, definitely. Welcome. No. So Saskia has studied law in Vienna, Paris, and Florence, worked at the European Commission in Brussels, and eventually switched to a marketing and sales position in Austrian real estate bank. So it's retailer bank. So it's fascinating. However, later on, she entered PR industry, and back in 1998, and today CEO at Ketchum Publico, which she has built into one of the most prominent communication consultancies. So that's Saskia. Next up is Kimberly, a woman with unconventional corporate and entrepreneurial career who worked and lived in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, where she founded and sold 2 technology companies. Today, the managing partner at the innovation strategy consultancy of Hori and the chair of the board at Voices for All Women. Welcome, Kimberly. Next up is Gernot. Gernot knows very well that growing internationally can be painful, and he has been there as entrepreneur, country manager, VP markets, also at companies that failed in their expansions. So we're really happy to have you on this panel. Today he's a co-founder and CEO of We Grow International, where he and his team have already helped over 300 startups and scale-ups to grow and scale sustainably. Welcome, Gernot. Last but not least, Konstantin. Konstantin worked in communication advertising for 20 years. So as you see, we have very different perspectives to the topic. Already coming to the stage, and he was the managing director for local and international organizations where he worked with brands such as Red Bull, Heineken, IKEA, Samsung, and Innocent. And he never planned to found his own company, Tochter, which you have founded. Welcome, Konstantin. So, let's jump directly into the core of today's panel of how to scale a business and brand. And my first question would be actually to you, Gernot. Since you have so much experience scaling startups and businesses worldwide, what, in your opinion, is the best way today to scale a business while ensuring the long-term success of those efforts?
Super interesting question. I think, growing, scaling a business, growing hurts, right? We all know that. Question is, how much does it have to hurt? But I think the era of blitz scaling is mostly over. I think that applies for certain business models where you really need to do this, where there's a lot of competition, but it's about make that sustainable, make it fast scaling, but make it also last for the long term. And that is a complex issue, because scaling into new markets, that also means that you need to scale your organization to a certain level, because if you don't build that up, that all just falls into each other like a house of cards and crumbles. So you don't want to do that. But that is indeed a really big challenge. So it's about the organization, it's about the people that you have on board. But the other part is, which markets do you go, and how do you go there, and how fast do you go there, and how much resources do you do and give into those new markets. I think what we see often, testing and validating those steps really makes sense. So not go all in and just put everything on one card, and then 6, 9, 10 months later, you realize, okay, we fucked up. I've been there. So I worked for a company that scaled really fast from 100 to 750 people in a year, 70 markets, and then we failed and we had to scale down and let 300 people go, and we burned through 20 million. So that's exactly what you don't want to have. That was not sustainable. The company is bankrupt now. Right.
We're going to talk about those cases more. But Kimberly, I know that you spoke about twofold approach when it comes to scaling, and also sustainability is the word you used. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to scaling, you can choose different elements. And I think having the opportunity that we have today is that we can scale rapidly because of digital innovation. But at the same time, reaching a lot of people doesn't mean that you will necessarily be there for the long run. Gone are the days where you can just build something, and because it's there, people will come. So how do you scale your solutions in a way that are sustainable? I think that that is also looking at how do you scale your impact? How do you really provide value to your customers in the long run? And how do you grow with them? How do you grow with your market? And how do you adapt to that situation? And I think that all comes back to your innovation roadmap, and how do you apply that to the different ways that you can scale internationally, but also as a business.
Excellent. I mean, we spoke about it from perspective of business and growth, and touched a bit on product. But when it comes to branding, Konstantin, and I think you're the devil's advocate, and you have your also take on how to scale a brand. So what would you say here?
First of all, it's interesting to bring business and brand together.
Which is important,
because
right?
Normally you say brand isn't a business factor, because this is what we've seen within the industry. This is, I think, within the organizations, a brand or marketing is often not so important like HR, legal, finance, supply chain, innovation management. So to bring the impact of a brand together with scaling a business, I think there where it should start from the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Saskia, I see you have a take on that.
Yeah, interesting. I thought that by now it's true that brand is such an important part of business. But of course, I mean, it might be in different areas, maybe differently perceived, probably, because I think that ever since we all talked about purpose and so on, and Simon Sinek, every founder, I guess, has looked at that and said, this is what I need to do, this is the purpose, the brand has to be built around the purpose, and I will take care of that. It's not necessarily probably the investors who see it that way, maybe, yeah.
But what's your take, Saskia, on scaling a brand and business?
Well, I think there's three things that are important that I found out in the preparation here that I can put under the 3 Ps. That would be like purpose, which is not the main thing, because the main thing is people. You talked about it, and you also, if you don't have the right people, then you can't scale, full stop. And you need to take care that the people that you hire from the start are really the ones that you build on also for the future, that you like promote this spirit of the people and the energy of the people to the broader organization. So it's people, it's purpose, and then it's processes. But I guess we'll speak about that. Growing means, as you said, it hurts because you need to install processes the larger you get, and that is not necessarily what people like to do if they are in a startup spirit.
I see. So, I mean, I think we touched from all the perspectives, which is interesting because the panel is how to scale a brand, but I think it goes way beyond that because the brand is the people, is the business, is the organization behind it. So what would you say are the absolute no-goes when it comes to scaling a brand, and maybe some red flags, but also maybe from your experience? I mean, Gernot, you said that you saw failures, you saw things not working out. Maybe you can share the learnings and from there for the no-goes when it comes to scaling a brand or a business.
Yeah, I think one of the major issues is one size fits all really doesn't cut it. So we help companies grow and to new markets and expand into those new markets, and very often we see that the mistake that is taken is just a copy-paste approach. So what works in your home market, then you think, okay, that might work in Germany or that might work in France or in the US or whatsoever, but just doesn't do it. Give you an example. So it's always the product market fit that is leading. You need to have that, and then your brand is well perceived, and then ultimately it will pull you into the market, right? A couple of years ago, we worked for a Danish startup. They provide warm lunches for canteens, and that's a thing in Denmark. You need to have that. They expanded. They thought about going next to a city where there's also a lot of bikes, where there is like water, and hence they ended up in Amsterdam. But can you tell me what people in Amsterdam eat for lunch?
Cold cuts and sandwiches.
Exactly,
yeah. Okay.
right? So they didn't know that fully enough, and they approached the market with something that is about warm lunches. So they lost quite some money until they realized, okay, that doesn't make sense.
So the mistake they did, was it because there was lack of research? What?
Yeah, they didn't do the research, and they just thought, okay, hey, external factors, there's a market that looks nice, interesting. They didn't research and validate that and test that, and then they just went there and hired people and opened up that market. Later on, actually, Vienna came out as one of the markets where that product fits. So it's finding the market that fits your product and then adjust it to the local circumstances and tailor it, and then that's where a brand obviously comes in.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Kimberly, how would you engage the audience and how would you build the community around after you succeeded and you saw there is a market product fit? How would you look in building a target audience around it when it comes to scaling a business in a new market?
Yeah, I think the funny thing about this is that it's usually an afterthought, where this should be one of the first things that you apply in your strategy when you're looking to scale, because you're going to be serving the community that you're looking to build, and so you need to understand them thoroughly. So to your example, in hindsight, probably it would look very strange to say we're just going to go somewhere without fundamentally understanding who we're going to meet. And I think it's the same around building a brand that lasts and that people would like to connect with. It's all about really immersing yourself in the experience of your users. And that doesn't matter if it's an application or it's a product, it's always going to be about what is this experience like in the context of where they are. And so you can have the best solution on paper and you can be better at the execution when it comes to the quality of things, but what really people really look at is how much value does it bring me. So bringing that value, reminding people of what your product does for them, and continuing to build on that is something that is going to get you there for the longer term.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So from the branding perspective, what are the no-goes? Konstantin?
At one point, absolutely agree with like global brands mostly, like they have their headquarters, and when they want to localize, they totally, completely miss culture, miss behavior. So I think there's a huge opportunity, but this is so interesting. Many of the big brands move away from localization and then 10 years later come back, and then 10 years later, I don't know, a new CFO is coming, and then they say, no, we need less offices or less people. So I think the cultural point is very important. And on your take, absolutely, I think it's audience first for whatever you do. So if you don't take like the audience in the front, you just decide, as we've all seen it, like 12 white males sitting in a room and deciding about business and brands, and this is a failure.
Audience first and people first, I think. Yes, I mean, audience are people, of course, looking at them deeper and so on, but also the people that you work with and that you hire, speaking of growing by community. So it's both the internal people that you hire, as well as the people that you connect with, that they are ambassadors for, like the audiences that you reach by the team that you have in place. I think that is also, in my view, really important. So, and if you ask me about the big mistakes, you were speaking of 10 white men sitting in a room and deciding what people like us, for example, would want to hear. So I think it's really not to rely on like one charismatic CEO who knows it all. That would be, I guess, really bad. You know, to have I guess in Female Founders Conference, it's obvious. Ich renne offene Türen ein, as we say in German, that have a collaborative management and a collaborative culture that develops also things together, and that isn't like.
I wanted to come back to you, Konstantin, because when I was sending this question to you, I was curious because you said a no-go is missing the mental and physical availability. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. Just one point, what you've said, I think, first of all, you need to understand what a brand is. And the problem with brands is like the same with like food or wine, is everyone has an opinion on a brand. There's not much expertise in organizations about a brand or marketing because it's such a soft area. And yeah, one no-go is because there are like many different theories about how to scale a brand, from distinctiveness, consistency. But one of the most important things is mental availability, that your brand is recognizable, is seeable, the distribution is fine. So you can have a super cool brand on all factors, but it's not successfully because it's not available mentally. So you think about it, you see it, and physically you can probably buy it or order it. So these are like the two great different discussions, but you can combine them from purpose, brand, cool campaigns, and in addition, always on mental availability, distinctiveness, consistency. So I think to combine those makes sense. Just to have a brand with a big purpose will not scale this brand. And there are just a few examples.
Have you ever had to like pull the plug, Kimberly or Gernot, and actually leave the market?
I mean, I can speak from my own experiences. I mean, in your introduction, you mentioned that I have founded and sold 2 companies, but in between that, many of my companies have failed. And so from my personal experience, yes, a whole lot. But I love those experiences simply because it teaches you again and again that, you know, trying and testing your assumptions is so important. And also being aware of the fact that sometimes you're just not going to fit. Sometimes the market is just not going to be for you, and you should be okay with that. You should be okay with testing and trying and failing and then going to another area of things. When I'm looking at working with my clients, what we do at Euphorian Company, we work a lot with large corporations that are operating in old economies that are trying to bring new solutions. So one of our biggest clients is in banking and finance, and so you know, fintech is now a thing, and everybody seems to be disrupting the market for them. And at the same time, you know, you have to choose, what do you want the bank of the future to look like? And does that mean that you have to have solutions for everything else as well, or should you just choose the direction that you want to take and conquer that niche? And that means that perhaps you're no longer the biggest bank anymore. And are you okay with that? So I think these are the kind of conversations that you should and need to be having if you want to be successfully scaling, looking to the future, because the walls are widening, and there's going to be, and we are creating more space for other type of services that are more specialized, which what Gernot said, one size does not fit all anymore.
I had to pull the plug, or we had to pull the plug. So the story, what I quickly mentioned, and I know some people here in the audience, they actually have been part of that story. We expanded to 17 markets, and half of them we had to close. This was really, really painful. We had burned more than 20 millions in that process. We had then lost the trust of investors. We couldn't close a follow-on round, and this was really painful. And we had to let a lot of really good people go that we just had hired. That was so frustrating for me and my now co-founder that we actually founded a company about it, and we wanted to pass that on. So that happened. And that's why we are very critical when we look at expansion plans and scaling plans. We typically build in a moment of truth. So it's a staged approach. So
what do you mean by that? What is a moment of truth?
Well, I'm going to throw a lot of fancy words in here now.
Don't do that. No buzzwords here.
The concept is very, very easy. It's define your affordable loss, especially for startup scaling. You need to know when, you know, and that can be binary things like, okay, we've hired a country manager in the new market and have the first 3 clients after 6 months. If not, we evaluate.
Right, guys, I hope you're making notes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like free consultancy.
Yeah, sure. But define that, because otherwise you tap into, and again, alert fancy word, sunk cost fallacy. So you will pour more money into it because you already invested a lot of hard blood, but also resources, right? So you want to avoid that and be honest to yourself. And sometimes the investors just poke you about that, or it's good if you do that yourself as a founder. So plan those moments in, define what is your loss, because otherwise you might lose your whole company.
Can I just go back to that unfortunate case? What was the reason there that you had to scale down?
Well, hindsight 2020, right? It's always easy to say it. I didn't make all the calls, right? I was none of the founders, but definitely one of the root causes was we were active in markets where we should not have been, and we didn't find product market fit. It was a travel startup, so you think that might be easy to find, but we didn't have the right products in all the markets. One, we scaled way too fast in terms of people. So sometimes we had 30 people for a market where we were just bleeding 100,000 every month in terms of marketing. Well, then 20 millions are spent really fast, right? So, and we thought in the opportunistic and optimism of founding spirit that we will just make it everywhere, and then we didn't. And it was healthy to make that cut.
True. Interesting insights.
So I mean, enthusiastic people is not enough. Yeah.
Right. And Saskia, I mean, you lived. You worked 20 years in PR and communications. what did you see happening to the industry in those 20 years?
To the PR industry.
Right,
Well,
in terms of when it comes to like scaling and building a brand, did you see like what evolvement have happened?
Well, PR is still a very local business. So you have, yes, you have global consultancies as we are part of Ketchum, but still we are very local business. We do have international clients, but many, many local clients. It's in advertising a bit different maybe, where you can scale a whole campaign through the world. And sometimes it doesn't work because they don't do it, they don't adapt it well locally, of course. So, and in the PR industry, I guess, this is so much about trust and relationships and about relevance and so on. That has not changed, even if the channels have multiplicated and the landscape has multiplicated of channel and of the media landscape. But at the core, it's always like the earned space. We want to acquire, we want to conquer the space that you can't pay for, and that has not changed at all. And in the industry, yes, whatever, there's Corona has actually been good for us because there was a lot of communication needed in COVID, of course, crisis communication, change communication, everything. So it has been the industry is booming in Austria.
Interesting. So I have this question for you guys. How do you differentiate the scaling based on different approaches, right? And I'm sure there's a different business models for that, but maybe you can give your insights and what you would prefer. So should it be based on sales, on product, or community growth? And is there different or similar growth strategies that you think right now are the most relevant? Who wants to go first? Business people.
I don't think this is like a simple answer and say, okay, that's the one silver bullet, right? I mean, with marketplaces, what you clearly see, it's community or supply side. Supply is very often leading, and you need to look at the markets. Will you be able to conquer that supply? Because why should you even think about investing in your brand when you don't have the inventory to sell things, right? Why should you put on marketing and build up a brand? Give you an example for parking app, or that basically provides all the uncontested parking, like off-street parking in private garages and everything. They thought they would want to go to Belgium, and then we tested that market, and it was clear it will be bloody hard to get that supply side going very fast. So then they knew that, and they could deploy the money in other markets, and now they're successful, and now they go there. So I think you have to think about what's your business model. Is it a marketplace or is it more e-commerce driven? Then that's a whole different case, and maybe then someone else can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I also think that, yes, it's industry related, but I also think it matters at what stage you're applying each strategy, right? And so you can have a sales focus at first, and that doesn't have to be your strategy for the next 10 years, obviously. So you can change in that, and you should change in that. And if you find that now there's a need for the building of a community, because that is going to bring you that sustainability, then you look forward into how can you deepen that approach. So I think it's very important to always go back to look at what stage are we in here now, and how, and every journey, and your scaling journey is not linear, right? And so I worked on a research paper that we've released in the Netherlands, and we were looking at what are some of the success factors for successfully scaling over 10,000s of brands across the world. And some of the things that you find is that, you know, every stage is going to require a different strategy. And also the organization is going to change in that versus, you know, where you have maybe that blitz scaling at the beginning because that's necessary. And then you have this internally focused scaling where you're actually only looking at how can we make the processes function well? How can we bring this to become a well-oiled machine so that we can actually handle the next stages of scale that we're about to go into. And so this is some of the things that you have to keep looking at and reflecting on. Where are we and what strategy applies?
I think that's the most important point, where you're at as a brand, because sometimes we work with organizations that say, yes, we go for sales, 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 but no one knows this brand. And probably one sales effort could work, but at the end, it will not lift up the brand to the next level. So when you have strong competitors with a different price, better offer, better service, you're gone. So you need to understand in which phase you are. And sometimes you do branding some years, and then you reduce your invest and go more on sales. But in small countries like Austria, I would say 70% of the marketing or brand you do is promotional.
Mm-hmm.
So
can you share, some examples? You worked with such amazing brands like Red Bull, Heineken, IKEA, Samsung, Innocent, and other amazing clients. Can you give maybe an example of how you help them scaling their brand from the brand perspective?
Yeah, to be really honest, when you're in a local market, you can more or less shape brands, but you don't really build brands. You shape communities, or you shape channels, or you shape strategies, but they're sometimes made in the headquarters. So I've not built a brand big like this. But it's sometimes the biggest problem is also here, it's structure and people. That's the biggest problem on scaling, on focusing, on being consistent, because then the next year, a new marketing plan comes and then they change everything. So this is, I would say, the biggest barrier also on those huge brands. And sometimes they decide we go all in brand in London, and then in, I don't know, Austria, you need to do all in brand, but you're like, no, that's not the right phase right now. So this is something you need to learn and sometimes accept. That's a missing understanding of culture and competition or whatever.
I guess it's, as you were saying, you don't scale the big brands here in Austria. I mean, Heineken is a global brand that they don't scale.
But we scaled it.
You did,
yeah.
Maybe you grew, but scaling. So I think we see that also in our work, that sometimes we work for whatever, Nespresso and all the P&G brands and so on. This is not about scaling. This is about building reputation, about, of course, supporting sales all the time, contributing to business success. But then we have these smaller brands. We just talked about it before. Neo, for example, it's a sugar-free chocolate bar, and we help them from the very start. And it's interesting because there you have, as you were saying, it's not one or the other. It's not sales or product or communities. And of course, it's a mix of these things, and probably maybe one after the other or connected. And how many minutes do we have? Because one client we have together, which is quick. It's e-bikes. And that
go for it. We're good.
We are over it.
No. We're good. We're good.
Okay, we're good. Because I think Quick is a nice story. You can tell from an international perspective.
Do that. Story is always a good idea.
Quick is super fancy e-bikes, Holland bikes. They are really nice bikes, e-bikes. And we thought when they came to Austria, wow, bikes are sold out everywhere. They will just sell warm, how to put it,
pies.
warme Semmeln, but warm pies. And it was not necessarily the case. We had to do a lot, and speaking about a lot of communication, a lot of brand and community building, making a showroom, getting, of course, the credibility via media relations, via online communication, everything. It was very much about building the brand first and then selling. And by the way, you can really get the bike and you don't have to wait 3 months, but you can have it, you can go away with it. I think that was important. And then,
I think it takes some time, right?
Yeah,
this was the learning also for that coincidentally joint client that we have. They didn't think it would take that long to be recognized as a brand in the e-bike market here in Austria, but it's competitive, right? So you need to position yourself, you need to localize, and that's what they did really well now in the second year here. And it takes time, but also I think very fast you can lose that trust. Give you another example, like a big US company moving into France, having issues with someone on the ground there that ended in a lawsuit, and that really damaged their reputation. And they could not sell that well anymore in that market because it was a very tight-knit community where they were selling into, and that was then always that kind of brand that had a lawsuit in the French market. So that goes out of the window very fast, and that brings you back to the people that you have for your expansion that need to fit your brand and kind of have that DNA and spread it, and that's the other cultural fit, right? So that's all somehow connected if you want to see it holistically.
There's a good quote, because what you need there is crisis communication, of course, and there's this quote, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. And then maybe if you build up it for 2 years, it's already enough and you can win it in a minute. Yeah.
Right. So we are slowly but steadily coming to an end for this panel discussion. I actually have a question if we can take questions from the audience. I don't know if that's feasible because probably some people have nice, juicy questions. But I had one as a wrap-up before I ask you about why you brought wine to the panel discussion.
We're in Austria.
Alcoholic country.
Why? Are you going to do something about it?
It's a present for you.
Okay, so it's going to be the last
yes.
final event. Okay, cool. But let's say there's a founder right here, and they're based in Austria or anywhere in the DACH region, and they would like to explore and potentially scale their business, therefore also brand, into a new European or non-European country. What would be your one advice to that founder? So, who wants to start? Or you?
Find a good person locally.
In terms of?
In terms of someone that is there in the country and represents your brand, if you want. Start with one person that you trust.
Interesting.
I keep saying it's about people.
Okay, so if you don't find that person, then pause it. Like, don't try to expand
I think
there.
it starts with people, but I mean, Gernot is the expert.
Okay.
But I say it's about having someone good in place.
That's an interesting one. Who's next?
Or just a small point, but which is important, is to have like an international mindset. I think in Austria, you sometimes think, this is working out in Austria. This is why it should work out in Germany. So open up your mind, because it's not such an international country. I think that's very important before starting this.
Okay, so if you're not open-minded, you might be like, hey, we're going to succeed in Italy, and then you might fail because you don't have that feeling and understanding for the market because you're a very confident Austrian person?
Yeah, enough stories.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, but that's where...
And you didn't find a good Italian to do it for you.
Exactly,
there. Yeah.
that makes sense. We have already like a bridge here. Kimberly, Gernot?
Yeah.
I can feel like you're thinking a tough answer.
No, I think there's so many things you can say. I mean, there's not one thing, obviously, that you need to think about. At the same time, you've already mentioned it's very important who you're going to appoint to roll out the brand. And at the same time, I also think it's very important that you look at how well you document that process, right? So that you can replicate that. And is it scalable? Because you're looking to scale not to one country, I hope. And so how are you going to do it in a way that is most efficient? So make time of that use to really find out, what did it cost us? What did it take? How long was the process? You know, what were some of the things that happened that we did not think about? And how are we going to prepare for that for the next time? And also, can we create some kind of playbook book that can be formatted for the context of the country, but is still applicable for scale?
It's a great one.
I think this is one of the things that is so often forgotten. So how to anchor that in the organization. 3 Ps and 3 Es. But 3 different Ps.
3 different Ps. Yeah. God, that's six
totally
Ps
count.
today.
I love them, but the 3 Ps that come to my mind is prepare, prepare, prepare. So it's nothing that we just run but do it, but prepare for it. And the 3 Es that
but prepare for what?
Prepare. Research your markets.
Right.
Think about what are the right markets for you. Test it. Test the waters before fully deploying money into it, and then go and scale. You know, go. But do the right steps and prepare for it. And the 3 Es will be about experience, expertise, and efficiency. And that brings us to the process, to the people that you need to have on board that have maybe done that before and can do it in the right way.
Excellent. I mean, those wonderful advice. You know, you just write it down, and probably you will succeed. Here it is. You have the secret sauce. Can we take questions from the audience, or will someone answer that? Me? Yes. Does anyone have questions? No. Oh. But if you have questions, feel free to check with us or talk to us. We're going to be hanging around here, and if you want to learn more about how to scale your brand or business, definitely have your questions ready, and we're happy to help you. So I guess that's a wrap.